here's the irony. What people keep saying to me is this. They say, well, you need to go by the words of Jesus. Of course, Jesus is the Word. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. So all of the Scripture is the Word, and the Word is Jesus. But they'll say you need to go by the words of Jesus because Jesus taught that we should love our neighbor as ourselves. And they act as if that's a new teaching that Jesus brought out, don't they? Yeah. Oh man, in the Old Testament, it was all hellfire and damnation and the God of wrath. But in the New Testament, Jesus came out with this new thing, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, when Jesus Christ said that we should love our neighbor as ourselves, He said that because they asked Him what was the greatest commandment in the law. Now, when they asked Him what's the greatest commandment in the law, He said the greatest commandment is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind. And He was quoting Deuteronomy chapter 6. And then He said the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And He said, on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Now, the term, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, is found one place in the Bible. And that's Leviticus 19:18. And that's the only place in the Old Testament you'll ever find the words, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, it's mentioned 8 times in the New Testament, but every single one of those 8 times in the New Testament, it's quoting Leviticus. So when Jesus said, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, He wasn't bringing some new revelation. He was quoting Leviticus that had been read in every Sabbath day to the Jews their whole lives. So how can you sit there and say, oh, Jesus brought a new teaching of thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself? No. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself is the teachings of the book of Leviticus. Look at Leviticus 19:18. It says, thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord. That is the only place you're going to find that statement in the Bible. Or it's going to be quoting that 8 times in the New Testament. So those that say, throw out Leviticus. We don't need Leviticus. And you know what's funny? The worst condemnations of homosexuals are found in chapters 18 and 20. Because you've got Leviticus 18:22 and you got Leviticus 20:13, and right between them is love thy neighbor as thyself. So people will try to have this warped doctrine that says, well, the Old Testament said, if a man lie also with mankind as he lieth with a woman, even both of them have committed abomination, they shall surely be put to death, their blood shall be upon them. But the New Testament says, love thy neighbor as thyself. Doesn't it just show the ignorance there? Of just not realizing that those quotes are in the same part of the same book. Where literally it's only a matter of a few verses later after saying thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself that He breathes the words of Leviticus 20:13. I mean, it's all based on ignorance, folks. People don't know the Bible. And then they get angry at somebody who tells the truth because they don't get it. And you know, if people would actually listen to the whole sermon, they'd actually learn the doctrine and there'd be no way to argue with it unless you... Here's a legitimate way to argue with it. You could just say, I don't believe the Bible. That would actually make sense. But what's sad is that people will say, well, I believe the Bible, but I just don't believe the Bible. No, you just haven't read, is the problem. And if Leviticus is some book that we shouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, then why in the world is Jesus saying it's the greatest commandment in the law, second only to loving God? Leviticus 19, the key chapter. Deuteronomy and Leviticus, these are key scriptures according to Jesus Christ Himself.